Hello, peoples. It is time for me to do my top 10 favorite movies of 2024. I had to watch quite a few movies before I did this list, quite a few, just for actually two of them to make the top 10 because there's a lot of movies that were like awards plays that I had to find ways to watch. I'm going to have a few honorable mentions, but this list is different, and it's different because of one big reason. Because we are in what I call the Dune 2 scenario, a movie that is so good, a movie that rises above every single movie on this list. I'm going to start out my video by admitting, yes, Dune 2 is number one. But to make it interesting, I'm just not going to put it on the list. We all know it's number one. It's not even, I don't even think it's fair to even put Dune 2 against these movies. That's how good I think Dune Part 2 is. We were blessed with one of the greatest movies ever made. This is in my Letterboxd 4. I think Dune 2 is a monumental achievement, and it's not going to be topped until maybe Dune Messiah comes out. I'm not going to put Dune 2 on the list. We can assume that's number one, so this can be, number 2 to number 11. But besides that, every single movie on here is just, it doesn't live up. In fact, Dune 2 is the only 5 stars I gave out this year. Not because every movie has to be Dune 2. It's just there was no movie that I felt like I needed to give 5 stars. Usually I do 3 to 4 or 5 stars per year. This year just didn't have that many for me. That doesn't mean, I think 2024 was a bad year for movies. I think it was still an overall solid year for movies. Maybe the last few years were a little better, but that doesn't mean this was bad. I think this was certainly better than 2020, maybe even 2021. Maybe not as good as 2022 and 2023. Overall, it was still a quite solid year for movies. So I do have a few honorable mentions. First honorable mention is what I want to call probably the rewatch of the year for me. The first time I watched this movie, I was like, it was okay. And then I watched it again and I was like, oh my God, now I get it. Because there was a lot of hype on this one. I was kind of late to it, and then I was kind of confused with why people loved it so much. And that is Longlegs. This movie had such a shocking rewatch factor to me that everything just worked so much more on rewatch for me. And I can't talk about it too long because it's just an honorable mention, but Nicolas Cage gives one of the best performances of the year in this movie. Osgood Perkins, I'm so excited for his the Monkey movie that's coming out. Next honorable mention is a movie that I bought the Blu-ray, but I've only seen it once in theater. I actually do want to watch it again. I almost rewatched it before I did this video, then I decided not to because it is kind of like a lengthy movie that's not exactly one that you want to rewatch even that much, but I still really enjoyed it, and that was Kinds of Kindness. Yorgos Lanthimos is weird. I had a fun time watching this. It was really weird, really fun, really kind of funny, amazingly acted, lots of randomness, and I really enjoyed it. Did I understand everything? No, I did not, but I had a good time watching it. Next honorable mention is a movie, one of the movies I did watch before making this video, making sure I watched it, and that is Conclave. I think that this movie's winning Best Picture. This is just going based off my gut. I can see it happening. Everyone's skeptical about who could possibly win Best Picture, but I think Conclave is going to sneak up and surprise us. How? I don't know how. I just see that as the Best Picture winner, and particularly because it's going to make right-wing people very, very angry. So anyway, Conclave, brilliantly acted, amazingly written. It's incredibly well made. It looks great. Beautiful cinematography. Edward Berger does a fantastic job directing this film, just as he did with All Quiet on the Western Front. I think it's a very fascinating movie to watch. You can't really... The tone of the film, despite its slow burn aesthetic, is very in the sense of you can't take your eyes off of it because of the heavy material that you're dealing with here and the way that this film makes you think. Next honorable mention is The Wild Robot. I really, really like this movie. It's an honorable mention. I think it's an incredibly animated film. It has such strong heart. It's one of the most emotionally, for me, draining movies of the year, besides maybe a few others on this list. It's a very well thought out movie. My only issue is that I think the structure is a little weird to this movie. I don't think it was structured properly, and I'm not even kidding. If this movie was just structured a little bit better within its acts, it would probably be a solid 5 stars, probably my second favorite movie of the year. But the weird structure to this thing kind of holds it back. But besides that, characters that I love, animation that looks fantastic, and overall a really fun watch. My last honorable mention is A Real Pain. I just watched this on New Year's Day, which was 9 days ago, and Kieran Culkin is going to get that Oscar. He's such a talented actor, but we cannot understate how good also Jesse Eisenberg is in this movie. He did a fantastic job writing and directing this. There's so much personality here, and a person like Jesse Eisenberg that kind of feels so I don't want to be mean because I'm sure he's an incredibly nice guy, but I'll just say he was definitely cast as Mark Zuckerberg for a reason. But he's able to bring out such life and personality in this film that is something that surprised me from him. He definitely wrote family drama well and realistically. It's a very sad and touching and in your feelings movie that I thought really worked. I think this is like I would describe a real pain as this year's The Holdovers. Now we're getting into the top 10. We're past the honorable mentions. Now, each one of these movies, are they the best movies of the year? Technically, no. This is my own personal list. I try to make a mix between what I think is objectively fantastic and also my own personal taste. There are movies that, yeah, I enjoyed more but didn't make the list. Like a good example is like Smile 2. I love that movie, but it was a little too long. And so I try to find a good mix between what I love and what I think is just overall good cinema, to make it more uniquely my list, besides going off based off enjoyment. Another movie I do want to give a quick shout out, like the movie I saw, I watched this movie a lot this year, even though I wouldn't give it an honorable mention because the movie isn't great, and it's a movie that, admittedly, I didn't even give a glowing review, but I enjoy watching it, and that's Deadpool and Wolverine. That's my last kind of honorable mention, even though it's literally number 29 on my list. Number 10, a movie that I think has gone under people's radar, and that is Glenn Powell's and Richard Linklater's Hitman. This was the most fun I had watching a movie this year. It is it's just like you turn it on, you're able to watch it the entire time. It's not, it's Richard Linklater, it's not super duper, showy with its filmmaking, but its story is really where the fun lies. It's a fun story, but it gets the characters right. It also understands what the audience wants to see out of this film. Is it gonna win Best Picture? God, no. But is it mighty entertaining? Yes. Does it have a solid message? Kinda, not really. But it has a very weird ending. I'll give that one. But it's overall a very fun, entertaining watch that I really enjoyed every minute of and did not feel any other runtime. Coming in at number 9 is the movie that I really wanted to see, didn't know if I'd be able to chance to see it. Thank God I watched it before I did this video, and that is Dee. One of the best coming of age movies I've seen in a long, long time. I'm typically not a big coming of age type of person. There's, a lot of movies that people love. I saw them like, okay, yeah. And usually my issue with coming of age movies is how biopicky of the filmmaker they feel like. It feels like it's the filmmaker telling their own story, but I feel like a big issue with that is that all these filmmakers think that they're interesting people, and then I watch it and I'm just kind of like, how that interesting? I'm sorry, I know this is like a passion project for you, but it's hard to find unique voices for coming of age stories. Dee is a very fascinating film to me. It's a film about fitting in. It's a film about growing up in the late 2000s. It's a exploration of this time period, but it's weird to see also, a big thing I noticed with this movie was it's very odd to see a movie about that has nostalgia in it for a time period for a time that I was alive in. And that's Dee is the first movie to ever do that. Like I was alive in 2008, but yet this movie has a coat of nostalgia in there. Nostalgia that I feel? No, I was 4 years old. To me, it feels like it was yesterday. But I can totally see somebody who was 10 during that time being a lot older now and feeling nostalgia for that. So to me, it feels like, what are you talking about? That was the other day for me. But to see the way that time passes for specific eras of your life is something that I thought was very fascinating. It's a incredibly well shot film. I think the cinematography in this was actually really solid. I was watching this. There's quite a few shots where I was like, good Lord, why it doesn't have to be this good. It's just a coming of age film. It's just a really well helmed film. It looks great and it actually has really solid messages. It's of course the I Love My Mom film. I think it got a lot right and found an individual voice that wasn't just the basic look how fascinating my life is. The only thing that did a little bit like veer into the like pretentiousness of filmmaking for this one is the fact that this main character was kind of lightly studying film, but like more of like a how can I make my friends look cool while they're skateboarding type of film research. But still, it kind of felt like that autobiographical layer was a little still there. Like I said, part of that irritates me because it can veer into clichéness, but this movie didn't necessarily do that. I didn't review this movie. In fact, the majority of these movies on my top 10 list I haven't talked about yet, so I might be a little lengthy with them. Coming in at number 8 is I Saw the TV Glow. I watched this movie back when it came out, and I never reviewed it, just because the time that it took me to digest this movie completely, by the time I kind of got it in my head, I was like, you know what, it's too late. So here I am at my top 10 of the year video. Wow, it is such a odd movie to talk about, particularly because because it feels so cinematic, but yet so human at the same time. It has such cinematic imagery and messages, but yet the way that it conveys it is very human to the point. Actually, I think it's so human to the fact where people think it's weird. Because I've heard a lot of people say that the dialogue is strange in this movie, and the way that people talk in this movie is very strange, but I think it's very human. There's a lot of times where they're talking to somebody, or particularly when Justice Smith is like having a scene where he's talking to his dad, there's a lot of really long pauses. There's a lot of really long pauses actually between lines where they are just not really knowing what to say, thinking about what to say, and it comes off as very unnatural. But to me, when I was watching this, I honestly was actually very inspired by it. I thought it was incredibly effective, but a lot of people thought that was unrealistic, which I strongly disagree with. I don't think we as people necessarily notice when we are doing that, nor everybody does that. I think it's a very type of weird niche type of relationship there, that between, or type of personalities clashing, that not everybody experiences. So I thought that was a silly criticism personally. At the same time, it was so interesting to see that type of connection between people explored on screen. This entire movie is like obviously like trans metaphor the film, and it does that in the most interesting, horrifying, and creative ways possible. It was a incredibly, like, at times hard movie to watch, and particularly the ending is one of the most, like, honestly some of the most horrifying stuff I've ever seen. It really wraps up the being trans and what it's like to suppress that within yourself, and how those people feel on the inside if they don't come out as trans. It puts that idea into anybody's head, and I think if you really watch this movie under that impression, I don't think anybody could watch this movie and truly get what Jane Schonenberg is saying and honestly be against the transgender ideology. I think it's an incredibly impactful film. I think this is what movies are made for. Is it one that the only thing is why it's not actually higher on this list is because, am I going to go back and rewatch this movie every day? No. It's not an incredibly rewatchable movie, but it is definitely a very artistic film that gets its message across very effectively, unlike any other movie I've seen this year. Coming in at number 7, I am so sorry, I have to do this for my own personal sanity, for my taste in film, is a movie that is on most people's worst movies of the year list. In fact, it's most people's worst movie of the year, but I think that is insanely silly. I think the way that this movie was received just kind of proves its own point, and people will argue with me about it anyways. But one of my favorite movies of the year, number 7, is Joker Folie à Deux. I love this movie. I just watched it again last night. This was the last movie I watched before I did this video, just to make sure, for the last thousandth time, I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy, everybody. This movie is great. I don't know why people are being so closed off to it. I honestly think the big reason, because of the discourse, is the majority of the people I've talked about with this movie who say it's bad, I talked to them about it, they're like, oh, that movie's bad. And I'm like, well, okay, what did you think was bad about it? And they say, oh, I haven't seen it. Because this movie was one of the biggest financial disasters of all time. There's no way getting around that. I'll admit that. The majority of the people that have talked poorly about this movie, that I have talked to about it, have not seen the film. And they're making fun of the out-of-context clips of the musical numbers, which is so silly. The way that this film was treated, particularly with the musical numbers, was so irresponsible of, I think, film critics and just people in general. I think we knew this was a musical going into it. And is this a bad musical? I don't think it is. I think, yes, it gets a little lost with the musical numbers in the latter half, but I think the foundation for why the musicals are there, that is laid out within the first act, is all really strong. I really enjoyed everything about this movie. Some of the best cinematography of the year. The fact that even if you hate this movie, I think this still should be recognized just for its pure beauty. I mean, when the trailer came out, we got that shot of the lipstick on the glass. Everyone was like, yes, this movie's gonna be real cinema. But then now whenever somebody sees a clip of anything from this movie, they go, ugh, it's bad, it's yucky. And that's the type of mentality that I really don't like when it comes to film. It's like they label a movie bad, and then everything that you see of that is just automatically bad. When there's a lot of fantastic work here. Joaquin Phoenix, once again, as Arthur Fleck, amazing in this movie, amazing. Lady Gaga is fantastic as Harley Quinn, or Lee Quinn, or whatever. Fantastic work. The themes and messages of this film is something I thought was genius. I loved the idea of tackling idealization and expectations of somebody like that's a psychotic approach to Joker. This movie, yes, people don't like the fact that it was a middle finger to the people that asked for a sequel. The fact that they actually made the sequel anyway, but still made a sequel that they wanted to make, is I think amazing. I incredibly admire Joker Foliata. I think it's gonna age incredibly well. I think it's gonna slowly gain a cult following. I think people in about 20 years will look back and be like, "You are stupid." I mean, yes, it might not be your cup of tea. I completely understand that, but to call this genuinely through and through horrible movie is something that I will never understand. It could not be for you. I understand that. If you watch this and say, nah, well, this was not a movie for me, I totally understand that because I'm not a big musical fan either. It's a movie that stuck with me up until right now. My only criticism is I think it's a little too long. I mean, each time I watch the movie, there's some points between the second and third act where I'm like, okay, let's move on with it. But this movie has stuck with me in a way that no other movie this year has stuck with me. It's a very unique film, and I'm all about that. Anyway, I'm done. Next, number six is The Brutalist. Finally, I watched this movie, and when it ended, after the 3.5 hours, I was like, okay, that was good. But talk about growing on you. Like I knew that this movie was really good when I first watched it, but it slowly itched up over time because it's just an incredibly well made, well acted film. Adrian Brody is fantastic. Brady Corbett's direction is, for a 36-year-old, is one of the most inspiring things this year. The Brady Corbett, I don't know how he did this movie. Like, for somebody as young as he is, and I know to me he's almost double my age, but still, to tackle a script that's so dense and themes and ideas that are so dense as well, and beautifully capture it in a 3.5 hour movie that isn't like a big, action movie or whatever. I didn't really feel the runtime. Like, yes, I did feel the runtime, but it didn't bother me. It's one of the most odd experiences I had this year because incredibly well shot. This was shot on VistaVision. Do I know what that is? I just know that's what it's called. How is it different from film? I don't know. Uh, it looks great. It's really well acted. It's mostly intriguing for most of its story. Like, of course, it's about this architect who moves to America, who has family still that he was separated from during the war, and it sounds like an incredibly Beatty film, but it doesn't feel like an incredibly Beatty film. Guy Pearce is fantastic in this movie. I really thought this movie looked and felt like a Christopher Nolan film, particularly with the way that the agriculture is filmed. It has this very handheld type of scope to the entire project that is something that you really don't feel besides like in a Nolan film. It has this broad intimacy that is also very Nolan-esque, and I really don't know if like Nolan was like a big idea in Corbett's head, but to me, I really just felt that spirit, particularly with mainly the camera work. It's a movie that I am desperate to see again. I really want to see it again. I think the entire cast is fantastic. It's just a good drama, great storytelling with very big ideas about immigration in America and what that means. And I thought it was just a really well made movie. Coming in at number five is Challengers. This was one of the most surprising movies of the year because it wasn't exactly what I expected, but in the best way possible. It was Luca Guadagnino really going all out. And it was like the most like exhilarating movie of the year. It had this very, very tense character moments, very, very tense tennis scenes. Everything in this movie really felt so character based, even though we have as well these exciting tennis sequences. Everything just really serviced these three characters and followed them in a very fascinating non-linear structure. It was just a very fun watch. It's a little long for what it is. I think it's almost 2 hours 12 minutes, but that time really just flies. The way that they shot this film is incredibly unique. I haven't seen a movie like this. The fact that Luca Guadagnino and Denis Villeneuve are not in the director's conversation this year is just embarrassing. Like seriously, those two are like the most like Challengers and Dune Part 2, some of the most like impressive directorial features this year, but yet they're probably not going to get nominated for directing, which is just embarrassing. Anyway, back to Challengers. Zendaya is fantastic. Mike Feist is fantastic. Josh O'Connor, fantastic. Even like these characters are so fascinating. I almost want to see a sequel, even though it'd be silly to get one. But yeah, coming in at number four is another movie that was quite divisive, and I don't care. When this movie came out, I think this was my most disliked review I've ever done. It was because of the very harsh discourse on it. But it seemed to die down after a while, and that was Civil War, Alex Garland's most recent film, and I thought it was exhilarating, thought-provoking, tense, one of the most edge off your seat films that I have seen the entire year. The cast is fantastic. Some amazing performances from Kristen Dunst, Kaylee Spaney, and what's the main guy's name? Wagner Mora. He was fantastic. I think people didn't talk about him enough. Just an overall really well acted, well made, thought provoking film, and it's just one that really stuck with me. It's horrifying. It's truly a horror movie. The scene with Jesse Plemons is one of my favorite scenes of the whole year. It's truly explores the horror of civil war, and people say, "Oh, this movie has nothing to say," blah blah blah. But I feel like you can't go into this movie looking to validate your political beliefs, because that's kind of like the opposite of the point that the movie's trying to make. The whole point is that you're not, oh, it doesn't matter with Trump this, Biden this, whatever, whose side is what. It's more of about the fact that we just need to avoid any type of civil war at all cost, because we are, at the end of the day, one. And we really shouldn't look at, where were you born? Where is he born? Are you a Democrat, Republican type of mentality anymore? And we really need to look out for us as a whole rather than our individual beliefs. And capturing those ideas through photojournalism and through that mentality was probably, I think, the best way to capture it. It's just a fantastic movie, and I really wish that people didn't just say, "Oh, it was a hollow mess," because I really don't think that it was. Coming in at number 3, it's Furiosa, a movie that I really liked it the first time I watched it, and I was never a big Mad Max person. Like, I never really thought even Fury Road was all that, but then I watched Furiosa, and then it even made me like Fury Road more. I still think Fury Road's a better movie, but Furiosa was actually, I would say, the movie that made me like Mad Max, finally. Because I always thought Fury Road was good, but I was like, okay, but there's like nothing to these characters. Furiosa made me care for Furiosa, and then I saw Mad Max, and it's like, then I saw Fury Road again. I was like, yes, this is so much better now. This film has a completely different approach to a Mad Max movie than all the other Mad Maxes before. I can't speak 100% to that because I haven't seen the third Mad Max movie, but I have seen the first 2, Fury Road and this. I would say that this was a fantastic theater experience. It was revving the entire time in IMAX. Chris Hemsworth is fantastic in this movie, one of the most underrated performances this year. Yes, people praised him when the movie came out, but I honestly would not be upset if he got Oscar nominations for this, because he just really went all out, went out of his comfort zone, and portrayed this really menacing villain, but also brought him so much levity at the same time. I really think you understood him, but understood also why we want him to die so badly. It's Furiosa's revenge in this film it feels so justified and understandable. The conflict between characters here is really fascinating, and it's just a really fun movie to watch. I mean, the action sequences are phenomenal in this movie. Yes, the CGI is a little but the visual aesthetic of this film is one of the most pleasing I've seen all year. Coming in at number 2 is one of the most effective and cringeworthy films I've seen this year, and that was The Substance. This was a really fantastic movie. I have so many images from this film just seared into my head, A, because of its meaning, and B, because of some of it was just really gross, but it really just puts you in the shoes of issues. And I think that's what all fantastic films do. They put you in the shoes of a person you really wouldn't normally in the shoes of, and it opens your mind to how they think. I think The Substance does a fantastic job at that. Another film I think does a fantastic job with that is I Saw the TV Glow. The Substance was just a really type of cinematic overload of women's standards and body expectations, and dials everything up to an 11, to the point where you really can't help but feel what these characters are, what this character that Demi Moore portrays goes through. You feel everything that she does, everything that she thinks, and you understand it. It attempts to make somebody like me, a man, who can't necessarily understand that experience, but dialing it up to 11 in the most extremist type of way is another very effective way to do that. It gives me a broader understanding on women's expectations, aging, and it's just an incredibly well-made movie at the same time. Dennis Quaid, even though I don't like that guy at all, delivers a fantastic performance in this movie. It makes me curious of what the idea was for his casting, if it was leaning into the fact that we don't really like him as a person, or if they just said, forget it, you're great for the role anyway. Or maybe a mix of both. But yeah, The Substance is just really a energy-fueled, wild ride that is one that is going to stick with me for a long time. And coming in at number 1, that's obviously not Dune Part 2, is the movie that gave me the most raw feelings, that ended on the note that was just so real, sad, heartbreaking, but effective, and just gave me an overall out of body experience, was Anora. This movie just blew my mind. It really just changed the way I see, honestly, I don't want to say love in general, but yeah, Sean Baker kind of changed the way that I see and perceive love. What other movie can you say that about? Like, that is such a monumental achievement. The performances here are fantastic, but what I say is the biggest achievement about this movie is I am somebody that's very structured, somebody that isn't a partier. I don't drink, never have, never will. I don't smoke, never have, never will. Very type of, I'm not a judgmental person. These type of characters in this movie isn't necessarily the type of people that I would associate with, nor necessarily probably get along with. Sean Baker makes me cry for Honora at the end. He seems like the most understanding guy of all time. At the end of the day, no matter who we are and what part of the structure we are in this world or what type of role that we have, we are all still human, and we have real human consequences. No matter what, we all have real human emotions. The way that of course, these movies that I love so much, like particularly Anora and The Substance, try to take its message and just dial everything up to 11 to make it more effective, just incredibly works for me. The movie's trying to define what I think love is, and I think obviously because the first half of this movie is very heightened, sensational, very cinematic, and the second half of this is very real, like painfully real to the point where it's just like any type of euphoria that you felt from this, fairy tale Cinderella story is just completely bleak gone, and it's very effective, and it slows down, it breaks down everything emotionally, and it really kind of takes that time to redefine everything that you just watched, and is one of the most effective things I saw a film do this year. It's incredibly sad because of its blatant truth to what it's trying to say, but it's also very eye-opening. I just about loved every minute of Anora, and so I'll just go ahead and say number 0, I guess, is Dune Part 2, because I said at the beginning I'm not putting it on the list. That's a movie I can go back watch every single day of the week. I don't care. These movies, yes, Anora, The Substance, phenomenal films, incredibly effective, loved every minute of it. Can I go back and watch those every day? God, no. Those would be too sad for me. But Dune Part 2 is very sad, but it gives me a different type of sensation than those films do. Yeah, those are my top 10 movies of the year. You can go and watch my Dune Part 2 review if you want to hear me talk about that more. Solid year for movies. I'm excited to see what 2025 brings. I did do my top 10 most anticipated. Comment down below what your top 10 of the year was. Do we have any in common? I do love comparing top 10 of the year lists, seeing what we have in common, what's not in common, and where did I place a movie that you have in your top 10 that I don't have in my top 10, and vice versa, and all that. So it's incredibly fun to share lists at the end of the year. So yeah, like, share, subscribe, and stuff like that, and adios.